The night cycle begins without ceremony. There is no announcement, no dimming of lights in any humane sense. Instead, the lumen strips embedded in the ceiling gutters shift frequency, bathing the cell blocks in a colder, harsher spectrum. It is not darkness that comes, but a more punishing clarity. Shadows sharpen, corners deepen. Every crack in the ferrocrete feels deliberate, as if designed to be counted. The prison is old. Not ancient in the way monuments are ancient, revered and preserved, but old in the way machinery becomes old, layered with repairs, scarred by necessity, swollen with additions never meant to coexist. Entire sections were built atop earlier sections, each expansion solving a crisis long forgotten. The result is a structure that does not flow. It compresses, it grinds. Cells line the corridors like industrial coffins. Each is barely large enough for a human body to sit or stand, but never stretch. The walls sweat condensation from distant cooling systems. The air tastes of recycled breath, antiseptic, and rust. Somewhere far above, massive processors calculate population density, oxygen efficiency, and acceptable mortality margins. No value is assigned to comfort. The prisoners feel the shift immediately. During the artificial day, labor and interrogation create noise, screams muffled by distance, the clatter of chains, the bark of orders. At night, those sounds recede. What remains is worse. The low, omnipresent hum of the prison's power spine becomes audible. It vibrates through bone. It sevels into the skull. After enough nights, prisoners stop noticing it consciously, but their bodies never forget. Movement is forbidden, not by rule alone, but by architecture. Doors are sealed with redundant locking systems that engage automatically at night cycle. Floor plates become pressure sensitive. Even the act of standing can trigger disciplinary responses. Somewhere, a logic engine evaluates intent based on posture, respiration, and heart rate. Fear is a measurable variable. For those new to the prison, the first night is unbearable. They wait for sleep that does not come. They listen for footsteps that never arrive. They imagine mercy in silence, not yet understanding that silence here is not absence, but attention focused elsewhere. Veterans know better. Veterans know that night is when the prison reorganizes itself, routing power, shifting patrol paths, reallocating surveillance priorities. It is when the prison decides who will still be alive by morning. Down the main access corridor, servitors glide along recessed tracks. Their movements are smooth, economical, and utterly indifferent. They do not look into cells unless instructed. Their sensors read vitals, heat signatures, and compliance indicators. Prisoners are not individuals at this stage. They are inventory under observation. Some cells are louder than others. Whispers travel through ventilation shafts not meant to carry sound. Prayers are murmured to gods long silent. Confessions spill out to no one at all. The prison records everything, but responds to nothing. Hope creates inefficiency. Despair stabilizes the population. Somewhere deep within the complex, interrogation suites power up. Not all prisoners are questioned during the day. Night interrogations are reserved for those marked as psychologically pliable, those whose resistance erodes faster in isolation and exhaustion. Their removal from cells is silent. By the time adjacent prisoners notice the absence, the individual has already been assigned a new designation, or none at all. The night stretches. There is no clock visible to prisoners. Time is measured in breaths, in heartbeats, in the gradual ache of muscles forced into stillness. The prison does not need to hurry. It was built to outlast generations, and it knows that everyone inside is temporary. By the time the lumen strips shift again, signaling the return of the artificial day, the prison has completed its work. Some prisoners will wake weaker. Some will not wake at all, and the prison will remember them only as numbers that have reached acceptable conclusions.
They do not come from nearby cells. They never do. Sound here travels in ways that defy distance, carried through ventilation shafts, cable conduits, and hollow structural cavities that were never sealed correctly. A cry can originate kilometers away and arrive distorted, stretched thin, stripped of identity. By the time it reaches a prisoner's ears, it no longer sounds human. That is intentional. The prison's night cycle is not for rest, it is for correction. Once population metrics stabilize and surveillance priorities shift, secondary systems activate. These systems are not concerned with guilt or innocence. They're designed to reduce variance. Emotional volatility, ideological resistance, and mental cohesion are liabilities. Night is when those liabilities are addressed quietly. In certain blocks, the walls vibrate. Not constantly, only in brief, irregular pulses. The frequency is low enough to bypass hearing and resonate directly through bone and tissue. Muscles tense involuntarily. Teeth chatter without cold. The effect is subtle enough to be dismissed by the uninitiated, but after hours of exposure, thought itself becomes difficult. Memory fragments lose sequence. Sentences dissolve before completion. This is not punishment, it is preparation. Across the prison, restraint fields fluctuate. Cells that appear identical do not behave the same. Some prisoners are permitted to slump against walls. Others find their limbs locking mid-motion, held upright by invisible force until circulation fails and pain becomes the only constant. The logic engines monitor response curves carefully, adjusting parameters to avoid premature death. Death is inefficient. Servitors continue their patrols. At night, their routes change. They avoid central corridors and favor maintenance passages embedded within the walls themselves. Prisoners hear them as distant scraping, metal against metal, accompanied by the faint click of data transfer spikes engaging unseen ports. The prison talks to itself constantly. Some prisoners try to scream. Those who do quickly learn the futility. Acoustic dampeners activate selectively, swallowing sound within individual cells while allowing others to carry. The inconsistency is deliberate. Uncertainty erodes solidarity. No one knows whether their neighbors suffer the same way or if they are alone in their degradation. In the isolation tiers, night is absolute. No lumen strips, no vibration, no sound. Prisoners here are denied even the reassurance of suffering. They float in sensory deprivation chambers that recycle air at barely tolerable levels. Thought turns inward, collapses under its own weight. Many emerge compliant. Some do not emerge at all. The prison records both outcomes without distinction. Deep within the complex, the adjudication arrays analyze collected data. Behavioral shifts are logged. Resistance indexes are recalculated. Individuals are reclassified. Labor capable, interrogation priority, expendable. These designations will determine the following day's assignments. None of this is communicated to the prisoners. knowledge would interfere with efficacy. Occasionally, something goes wrong. A heart stops earlier than projected. A mind fractures too completely. A body convulses against restraint fields until structural damage occurs. When this happens, the prison does not react emotionally. It compensates. Environmental parameters are adjusted. Nearby prisoners are subjected to slightly harsher conditions to offset the loss of instructional value. Balance must be maintained. As the night cycle progresses, exhaustion sets in. Not the relief of sleep, but the grinding fatigue of enforced awareness. Eyelids grow heavy, but every time consciousness begins to slip, stimuli intensify, air pressure shifts, restraints tighten. Sleep is permitted only when the system decides it is safe. For a few prisoners, the night offers something worse than pain. It offers clarity. They begin to understand the prison not as a place of punishment, but as a machine designed to process human beings into outcomes. Guilt is irrelevant, innocence meaningless. Survival is conditional, temporary, and always subject to reevaluation. By the time the night cycle nears completion, most prisoners are no longer thinking about escape. They are thinking about compliance, about silence, about doing whatever is required to reduce attention. When the lumen strips finally shift again, restoring the brutal illumination of artificial day, the prison has already decided who the next night will belong to.
The initial corrections have been applied. Variance has been reduced. What remains is maintenance. Fine adjustments made to ensure that the population will still function when the next work cycle begins. This is the longest part of the night, and the one prisoners remember least clearly. Fatigue becomes structural. Muscles no longer ache sharply, they throb dully, as if belonging to someone else. Thoughts arrive late, incomplete, often dissolving before reaching coherence. Prisoners lose track of when they last blinked, when they last swallowed. The prison does not mind. It tracks these failures precisely, noting thresholds where the body continues despite the mind's withdrawal. In the labor tiers, restraint fields ease just enough to allow collapse. Prisoners slide down cell walls and remain there, half-conscious, unable to tell whether minutes or hours pass. The floor is cold, designed to draw heat from the body and prevent deep sleep. Those who attempt to curl into warmth find the geometry of the cell makes it impossible. Angles force the spine to remain misaligned. Some prisoners dream. The prison allows this selectively. Dream cycles are monitored, sampled through cranial sensors embedded in head restraints or collar implants. Trauma responses are logged. Ideological content is flagged. Dreams that trend toward defiance trigger corrective stimuli, sharp pulses of light, pressure spikes, sudden temperature drops. Dreams of submission are permitted to continue. The prison edits the subconscious. In deeper sections, maintenance teams move. They do not enter cells. They access the prison through crawl spaces and service ducts that prisoners never see. They replace worn restraint emitters, recalibrate sensors, scrub biological residue from grates. When bodies are removed, the process is efficient. No ceremony, no record visible to the population. Absence is normalized quickly. Prisoners notice empty cells at the edges of perception, then stop noticing them at all. The prison encourages this through subtle environmental changes, adjusting lighting, shifting acoustics, altering airflow so that emptiness does not stand out. Memory of others is a form of resistance. At this stage, interrogation teams finalize their selections.
Targets identified earlier are reassigned to transport queues. Their cells unlock silently. Gravity fields guide them out whether they can stand or not. They do not resist. Resistance has already been addressed. For the remaining population, this removal serves as a quiet reinforcement. Compliance reduces attention. The logic engines complete their calculations. Projected productivity is within acceptable margins. Mortality has not exceeded thresholds. Psychological degradation had advanced at a sustainable rate. The night is deemed successful. Just before the cycle ends, the prison relaxes, not out of mercy, but efficiency. Stimuli taper off. Restraints loosen to baseline levels. A handful of prisoners lose consciousness entirely, slipping into shallow, dreamless sleep minutes before the lights change. Others remain awake, too conditioned to trust the quiet. When the artificial day returns, it does so abruptly. Lumen strips flare to full intensity, doors unlock, orders are issued, chains are reattached, labor assignments are transmitted. The night is not acknowledged. There is no record visible to prisoners that it occurred at all. But their bodies remember, their minds remember, and the prison does not need to repeat itself perfectly, because every night builds on the last, until resistance is no longer something the prison has to remove, only something it waits to decay on its own.
The artificial day begins with activation, not awakening. Lumen strips ignite at full output without warning, flooding the corridors with white light that exposes every surface, every stain, every prisoner pressed against ferrocrete walls. There's no gradual adjustment. Disorientation is deliberate. Those who flinch are noted. Those who do not are noted differently. Chains descend from ceiling tracks. They lock around wrists, ankles, and sometimes necks, depending on the prisoner's classification from the night cycle. No guards issue commands. The chains move with mechanical certainty, guided by logic engines that already know where each body will be sent. Refusal is not anticipated because refusal has been made statistically unlikely. Cells open in staggered sequences. Prisoners are released in controlled flows, never enough to form crowds, never enough to allow eye contact for more than a moment. Corridors curve subtly, breaking lines of sight. Surveillance nodes follow every movement, adjusting angles to eliminate blind spots. The prison does not watch from one place, it watches from everywhere. Labor decks receive the first transfers. They are vast, cavernous spaces filled with machinery whose purpose prisoners are not meant to understand. Conveyor lines stretch into darkness. Processing engines roar at volumes that drown out speech. Work assignments are not explained. Prisoners learn through injury and repetition. Those who failed to adapt are removed quietly. The work is endless by design. Tasks are cyclic, repetitive, and deliberately disconnected from visible outcomes. Prisoners turn valves that will be turned again by someone else. They carry loads from one platform to another, only to return them later. Meaning is unnecessary. Fatigue is sufficient. Overseers observe from elevated platforms. Some are human, wrapped in layers of authority and protective gear. Others are not fully organic, their bodies modified to endure the prison's atmosphere indefinitely. They do not threaten, they correct. Discipline is applied with minimal emotion, often without verbalization. Pain is a tool, not a punishment. The air in the labor decks is thick. Particulate matter clings to skin and lungs. Filters remove just enough toxins to keep mortality within acceptable limits. Coughing is common. Collapse is anticipated. Those who fall are marked for reassessment,
not assistance. Productivity curves must remain stable. For some prisoners, mourning brings interrogation. They are diverted from labor flows without explanation. Transport frames guide them through deeper corridors where the architecture changes, walls smoother, lighting more controlled, silence heavier. Here, questions will be asked that were already answered by the night. Confession is a formality. Throughout the day, the prison measures everything: step cadence, grip strength, reaction time, compliance latency. Data flows upward into systems that refine the next night's corrections. The prison does not improvise, it iterates. By mid-cycle, exhaustion sets in again. Not the sharp terror of the night, but the grinding wear of endless exertion under observation. Prisoners begin to move automatically, conserving thought, conserving will. This is the desired state. A body that works without asking why is a stable component. The prison hums, deep, constant, inescapable. It is the sound of systems functioning as intended, and as the artificial day grinds forward, every prisoner understands, at least instinctively, that night is not an interruption of this process. It is its most important phase.
Productivity peaks are brief. The logic engines anticipate decline long before it manifests. By the time exhaustion becomes visible, the environment has already shifted to compensate. Temperature drops by fractions of a degree. Oxygen content thins just enough to quicken breath and cloud focus. These adjustments are subtle, cumulative, and carefully calibrated to extend output without collapse. Prisoners begin to lose awareness of one another. The noise of machinery erases speech. Hand signals are punished as inefficiencies. Even eye contact becomes difficult under the glare of lumen strips and the constant motion of labor lines. Isolation is maintained even in crowds. The prison understands that solidarity forms in silence, not proximity. In certain sectors, the work changes. Here, prisoners are assigned to tasks that require precision rather than strength, sorting fragments of unfamiliar materials, aligning components whose tolerances are impossibly narrow. Any mistake triggers immediate correction, sometimes to the work, sometimes to the worker. Pain is administered without anger, as feedback rather than retribution. Mistakes decrease rapidly, not because prisoners improve, but because fear sharpens attention. Hands shake less, movements become economical. Thought narrows to the space directly in front of the body. The prison records these adaptations with approval. Psychological compression improves efficiency. Some prisoners are removed mid-cycle. A chain locks, a gravity field engages. The individual is lifted from the line and carried away without interrupting the flow of labor. No explanation is given. The remaining prisoners do not slow. They have learned that curiosity draws attention, and attention is rarely beneficial. In the administrative levels, data consolidates. Night cycle results are compared against day cycle performance. Resistance indices are updated. A small percentage of prisoners are flagged for transfer to different blocks, different duties, or different outcomes entirely. The criteria are opaque, even to many overseers. Human judgment is unreliable. Algorithms are preferred. Interrogation suites remain active. Those brought here experience time differently. Sessions are broken into irregular intervals, interspersed with enforced wakefulness and sensory deprivation. Questions repeat with slight variations, not to extract information, but to map cognitive stress points. Truth is secondary. Predictability is the goal. The prison's medical systems operate quietly. Injuries are treated only when untreated damage would reduce long-term productivity.
Limbs are stabilized, infections suppressed. Pain is managed only to the extent necessary to preserve function. Those beyond salvage thresholds are categorized accordingly and removed from the system. By the latter half of the day, prisoners stop counting hours. Hunger becomes a background pressure, addressed intermittently by nutrient dispensers that provide flavorless sustenance optimized for caloric efficiency. Eating is not a break. It is another task, timed and monitored. Those who eat too slowly are flagged. Those who eat too quickly are flagged differently. Fatigue deepens. Bodies move on habit. Minds recede. The prison prefers this state. A compliant population is one that no longer imagines alternatives. Thought becomes effort. Silence becomes survival. As the artificial day nears its end, subtle changes ripple through the complex. Machinery cycles down incrementally. Patrol routes shift. Surveillance priorities reallocate. The prison prepares for night as not a change in atmosphere, but as a transition to a more efficient phase of control. Prisoners feel it instinctively. The light grows harsher. The air grows colder. And somewhere deep within the structure, systems begin to wake that were never meant to be seen. Systems that will finish what the day has only prepared.
There is no signal to mark completion, no announcement to separate labor from confinement. Work simply stops being required. Machinery powers down in staggered sequences. Conveyor lines slow, then halt. Prisoners stand where they are until the chains tighten and the prison decides where each body belongs next. Return routes are more restrictive. Corridors narrow, lighting dims unevenly, surveillance density increases. Prisoners are guided back towards cell blocks through paths that shift subtly from day to day, preventing mental mapping. Disorientation is cumulative. After enough cycles, direction loses meaning entirely. Those marked for reassignment do not return. They are diverted at junctions that do not exist on visible schematics. Gravity fields lift them away from the flow, drawing them into deeper sections of the prison, where architecture becomes smoother and more deliberate. For those left behind, absence is immediate and permanent. Cells receive their occupants efficiently. Chains disengage only once doors seal. Some prisoners collapse the moment restraints release. Others remain standing, afraid to move. The prison does not correct either response. Both provide useful data. Nutrient dispensers activate briefly. This is not a meal, but calibration. Intake is measured. Deficiencies are noted. Adjustments will be made during the night cycle. Hunger sharpens awareness. Starvation breaks it. The prison maintains balance. As the lumen strips begin their gradual frequency shift, prisoners understand what is coming. The night is not worse because it is violent. It is worse because it is deliberate. Every cycle builds upon the last, refining pressure points, optimizing degradation. The prison does not need to escalate indiscriminately. It knows exactly how much each individual can endure. Doors lock, restraint fields activate, pressure plates arm beneath the floors, air circulation changes, carrying colder currents through the blocks. The hum of the power spine deepens, settling into a rhythm that permeates bone and thought. Some prisoners whisper, others pray, most remain silent. Silence is not safety, but it reduces attention. The prison notices those who try to remember their names, who cling to fragments of identity. Those fragments are liabilities. They will be addressed in time. Deep within the complex, night cycle systems come fully online.
Interrogation suites reset. Isolation chambers prepare. Corrective frequencies are tuned. The logic engines finalize their projections. Productivity remains within acceptable margins. Resistance continues to decay. Mortality has not exceeded thresholds. The prison is functioning optimally. As the artificial day fully yields to night, prisoners feel the final shift. Light hardens, air tightens, time stretches, and once again, the prison turns its full attention inward, not to punish, not to judge, but to continue the slow, methodical work of turning human lives into manageable outcomes.
The prisoners are no longer surprised by the transition. Fear has lost its sharp edges, replaced by a dull, persistent pressure that fills every gap in thought. The prison senses this shift immediately. Systems adjust, not to relieve stress, but to prevent adaptation from becoming resistance. The lumen strips dim further than before, not into darkness, but into a strained half-light that forces the eyes to work constantly. Shapes blur, depth perception falters. Prisoners misjudge distances and strain their necks trying to focus. Headaches become common. The prison measures how long each individual can endure before cognition degrades. Restraint fields fluctuate. They tighten and loosen in irregular patterns, never long enough to become predictable. Muscles twitch involuntarily. Limbs jerk against invisible force. Sleep becomes impossible, not because of pain, but because of anticipation. The body braces constantly, wasting energy it cannot afford to lose. Some cells are chosen for escalation. The prisoners inside are subjected to overlapping stimuli, vibration through the walls, pressure changes in the air, faint auditory distortions that never resolve into recognizable sound. The effect is subtle. No single stimulus is overwhelming. Together, they fracture concentration. Thought loses cohesion. The prison watches closely. Individuals who mutter to themselves are flagged. Those who begin to count breaths or recite fragments of memory are flagged differently. Coping mechanisms are data. They reveal how identity persists under compression and how it can be dismantled efficiently. In adjacent blocks, nothing happens. This inconsistency is deliberate. Suffering that is universal becomes shared. Suffering that is selective becomes isolating. Prisoners listen for signs that they are being spared or targeted, never realizing that the uncertainty itself is the instrument. Occasionally, a voice breaks the quiet, a scream, sudden and brief, cut off before it can echo. The source is never identified. The prison does not allow clarity. Rumor is inefficient. Ambiguity spreads faster. Deep within the complex, the night cycle processors adjust parameters in real time. Thresholds are crossed, limits recalculated. No system here relies on tradition or doctrine. Everything is empirical. Pain is a variable. Fear is a curve. Compliance is the desired asymptote. By the midpoint of the night, many prisoners begin to hallucinate. Light flickers where it does not. Shadows move independently of bodies. Sounds repeat with slight variations, creating the illusion of pattern. The prison does not correct these perceptions. It lets the mind exhaust itself, trying to find meaning. Those who remain lucid feel something worse: awareness. They begin to understand that nothing here is accidental, that every sensation, every absence, every irregularity is intentional. The prison is not cruel, it is precise. And precision, applied patiently over time, is far more effective than brutality. There are no outbursts now, no shouted defiance or desperate pleas. The prison has already filtered those responses out. What remains is quieter,
more dangerous to the individual and more useful to the system. Prisoners turn inward, attempting to negotiate with themselves in ways the prison has already anticipated. Memory begins to fracture, not through erasure, but through distortion. Faces blur, names lose weight, events reorder themselves without warning. Prisoners recall moments that may not have happened, or forget things that once defined them. The prism encourages this gently, altering sleep deprivation thresholds and sensory input just enough to destabilize recall without inducing complete psychosis. In some cells, recorded voices activate. They do not speak words, they mimic cadence, breathing patterns, the rhythm of human presence without the reassurance of meaning. Prisoners strain to interpret the sounds, to find familiarity in them. The effort is exhausting. Exhaustion accelerates compliance. Restraints shift again. This time they allow limited movement, just enough for muscles to ache with the effort of maintaining posture. The illusion of agency is powerful. Prisoners attempt to adjust their stance, to find relief, only to discover that every position carries its own penalty. The prison notes how long each individual persists before abandoning choice altogether. Some prisoners begin to dissociate. Their perception detaches from the body. Pain becomes distant. Time loses structure. From the prison's perspective, this is neither success nor failure. It is a transition state. Dissociation reduces immediate resistance, but complicates long-term control. Parameters are adjusted accordingly. Across the block, one cell is opened. Not violently, not abruptly. The door slides aside with controlled precision. A gravity field engages, lifting the occupant just clear of the floor. There is no struggle. The prisoner's body responds sluggishly, as if already half absent. The door seals again. No one knows where the prisoner has gone. The silence afterward is heavier. The prison allows it to linger. It does not fill the void with noise or movement. Silence forces prisoners to confront absence directly. Absence erodes identity faster than pain. In the administrative layers, long-term projections update. Population decay is within acceptable margins. Psychological malleability is improving. Resource expenditure remains efficient. The system notes a small increase in latent resentment, but predicts it will collapse under continued isolation. No immediate correction is required. Near the end of the night, a different stimulus emerges. Warmth. Barely perceptible, localized to select cells. Muscles relax involuntarily. Breath deepens. The sensation is almost comforting. Prisoners who experience it cling to the feeling, hoping it will return. The prison marks them carefully. Relief is a powerful lever when applied sparingly. Others are denied this entirely. They remain in cold, rigid stillness, aware that something has changed elsewhere, but unable to identify what. Envy becomes another pressure point, another fracture along which compliance can be encouraged. The night continues, not as an ordeal, but as a process, not as chaos, but as refinement. And as it grinds on, the prison draws closer to a state where it no longer needs to impose control, because the prisoners will begin to impose it on themselves. Not because the prison has exhausted its tools, but because it no longer needs them. The population has been reduced to a state where minimal input produces maximal effect. Systems idle at low output, conserving resources while maintaining pressure just above tolerance. The prison prefers this equilibrium. Breathing becomes the dominant sound. Not loud enough to identify individuals, but present as a collective rhythm, uneven, shallow, and strained. Ventilation systems modulate airflow in response, maintaining oxygen levels that support life without encouraging rest. Sleep remains elusive, but consciousness blurs at the edges. Some prisoners lose track of where their bodies end. Limbs feel distant, weight shifts unpredictably. When restraint fields tighten briefly, it takes longer for pain to register. The prison records these delays carefully. Neurological degradation curves are plotted and compared. Individuals nearing functional limits are flagged for reassignment. In select cells, the walls warm slightly. Condensation evaporates. The air grows marginally easier to inhale. Prisoners in these cells experience a fleeting sense of relief. Their bodies respond immediately. Muscles unclench, breath deepens, heart rate slows. The prison allows this for minutes, never longer. Relief that ends abruptly reinforces dependence. Elsewhere, conditions worsen. Cold intensifies, pressure fields tighten. The contrast is intentional. The prison is not seeking fairness, it is mapping thresholds. By varying conditions across a controlled population, it learns how quickly hope forms and how easily it can be withdrawn. No explanations are given. Prisoners speculate internally, crafting narratives to make sense of the shifts. The prison monitors these cognitive patterns. Those who attribute change to personal behavior are more easily controlled. Those who perceive randomness resist longer, but fracture more violently when certainty collapses. As the night approaches its end, systems begin to prepare for transition. Restraint fields stabilize, vibrational stimuli taper off, surveillance reallocates toward morning priorities. The prison does not announce these changes, it relies on the body to sense them. Anticipation becomes another form of control. A few prisoners finally lose consciousness. They collapse into shallow, fragmented sleep, minds too depleted to resist. Dreams, when they occur, are colorless and incomplete. Faces blur, voices lose words. The prison samples these fragments, storing them as data points for future cycles. Those who remain awake experience something worse: clarity. They understand now, not intellectually, but instinctively, that the prison does not need to escalate. It has already achieved its objective. Resistance has been converted into compliance, identity into function, time into a tool. When the lumen strips flare to signal the return of artificial day, the transition is brutal in its normality. Chains descend, doors unlock, orders propagate. The night ends without acknowledgement, but its effects remain, etched into posture, into breath, into the quiet acceptance that the prison will repeat this cycle as many times as necessary until nothing remains that needs to be broken.
Prisoners move like cogs within a machine they cannot see, cannot comprehend, yet cannot avoid becoming part of. Every gesture is monitored, every misstep cataloged. The logic engines anticipate fatigue before it manifests, adjusting environmental variables with precision to maintain output within predetermined tolerances. The labor tiers grow quieter, not because work slows, but because those who make noise have already been removed. Whispers cease, even muttered complaints are interrupted by subtle vibrations in the floor or pulses through neural implants. Silence becomes a medium for observation. The prison does not need words to understand compliance. Heat shifts imperceptibly. Air currents move along engineered paths, forcing prisoners to strain muscles just to maintain posture. Skin prickles under uneven lighting. Respiration quickens.
Every micro-adjustment is recorded, feeding the system's ever-growing map of human endurance. Errors are no longer punished overtly. A misaligned component or slowed motion triggers cascading corrections elsewhere. Pressure plates in adjacent corridors activate, tilting floors. Mechanical arms adjust weight subtly. The worker may feel only a flicker of imbalance, but the message is clear. The environment itself enforces discipline. Some prisoners begin to dissociate. They drift within their own bodies, aware of surroundings but unable to reconcile actions with intent. Pain, exhaustion, and sensory distortions converge, forcing cognition to fragment. This is not failure, it is efficiency. The prison measures how long a mind can operate under these conditions before collapse and adjusts cycles accordingly. Servitors glide through the tiers. They administer nutrients, realign machinery, and apply corrective impulses where necessary. Their presence is constant but unobtrusive, like gravity itself. The prison does not rely on servitors to intimidate. They exist to ensure uninterrupted operation. Their optics do not miss a detail. Their processors anticipate irregularities. The anomaly of human will persists. Even now, prisoners attempt to form fleeting strategies, to conserve energy, to hide effort, to communicate without detection. Each attempt is recorded. The prison catalogs not only compliance, but the creative measures of adaptation, refining its methods to preempt them next cycle. Interrogation corridors prepare silently. Those slated for deeper observation have already been identified through micro-behaviors, a lingering gaze, an irregular breath, a subtle hesitation. Movement through the labyrinthine access ways is precise, efficient, and invisible to the general population. Extraction is quiet. Questions are no longer asked, they are anticipated. By mid-cycle, the environment itself enforces obedience. Cold surfaces, uneven lighting, and subtle vibrational pulses replace overt oversight. The prison becomes a force field, directing thought and motion without ever speaking. Bodies adjust instinctively, minds comply unconsciously. As the artificial day wanes, prisoners sense the coming night, not through announcement, but through pattern. Slight drops in temperature, a shift in light frequency, a deepening hum from the power spine. Even those who resist consciously brace themselves. Survival depends on alignment, not rebellion. And so the prison closes its loops. Every prisoner, every movement, every pulse is accounted for. Every mind, every body, every breath is measured. Night will arrive to refine, to fracture, and to perfect the work already begun. And by then, there will be nothing left to resist.
The lumen strips shift to their coldest frequency, bathing the corridors in a pale, spectral clarity. Prisoners stiffen instinctively, even before the chains begin to descend. Those who have adapted to the cycles anticipate the restraint fields, the subtle air pressure changes, the vibrations pulsing through the walls and floors. The prison no longer surprises, it enforces a rhythm. Restraints engage with mechanical precision. Wrists, ankles, and torsos are locked in alignment with micro-adjustments that prevent comfort without inducing collapse. Muscles tense automatically, breaths shorten, bodies align to the prison's expectations. Every deviation is logged, every tremor recorded. Human error becomes data, analyzed to predict the next cycle's compliance curve. Servitors glide silently through the block. Their optics scan thermal, electrical, and chemical signals. Any micro-variation in skin temperature or respiration is noted. They do not correct immediately. Observation precedes intervention.
The prison trusts the delay. It increases compliance without overt force. The prisoners who remain conscious experience isolation differently now. Walls seem closer, floors harder, air thinner. Sounds of machinery, once background noise, now dominate perception. Even a distant hum becomes oppressive, vibrating through bone and marrow. Mind begins to fracture along predictable lines. Memory loses its coherence. Identity dissolves into function. Interrogation chambers activate quietly. Those identified for further evaluation are guided into hidden corridors by subtle gravity fields. Their extraction is so precise that adjacent prisoners scarcely notice. Questions are anticipated, behavioral responses monitored, neural impulses cataloged. Confession is irrelevant, prediction suffices. In the main cells, stimuli shift subtly. Temperature fluctuates, vibrations pulse in irregular rhythms. Light sharpens intermittently, then fades. Prisoners strain to maintain balance, posture, and awareness. Fatigue, once merely physical, now attacks cognition. Sleep remains impossible. Every attempt at focus fails. Some prisoners hallucinate. Shadows flicker independently. Machinery sounds repeat in loops. Figures appear at the periphery of vision, only to vanish when attention turns. The prison does not correct these perceptions. They serve as a mirror, reflecting internal instability back into external reality. Silence becomes absolute. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of observation. Every micro-action is felt, measured, analyzed. Prisoners move with the caution of shadows, aware that even thought may be monitored. By the final hours, the night achieves its purpose. Compliance has been maximized, resistance has been diminished, minds and bodies operate predictably. The prison does not need to strike or threaten. Obedience has become automatic. As the lumen strips flare to signal the return of artificial day, the transition is abrupt. Chains release, doors unlock, orders propagate. The day begins anew, but the prisoners are no longer the same. They are functional, they are measured, they are contained. And the prison waits, patient and eternal, to refine what it has already shaped, knowing the cycles will continue until nothing within can defy it.
The prisoners wake into motion without being told. When the lumen strips ignite, bodies tense automatically. Spines straighten, hands lower in anticipation of chains. Fear has been replaced by calibration, an instinctive alignment with what the prison expects. Those who hesitate are rare now, and they are removed quickly. Morning labor begins earlier, not by clock, but by compliance curve. The logic engines determine that the population can sustain longer output without catastrophic loss. Conveyor lines activate while some prisoners are still regaining awareness. The delay between waking and exertion shrinks. Fatigue becomes continuous, unsegmented by rest or relief. Work assignments grow more precise. Prisoners are no longer interchangeable units. Each body has been mapped. Grip strength, error rate, reaction latency. Every weakness is cataloged. Tasks are assigned to exploit those weaknesses gently but relentlessly. The prison does not break bodies abruptly. It wears them down along optimal trajectories. In the fabrication tiers, hands bleed. Microfractures form in fingers forced into repetitive precision. Pain is constant but muted, managed just enough to preserve function.
Bandages are applied by servitors without slowing production. Blood is not a crisis. Blood is expected. Overseers speak less. Orders are transmitted directly to restraint collars and neural implants. Corrections arrive as impulses rather than words, sharp, efficient reminders of acceptable performance. Language introduces ambiguity. The prison has no use for ambiguity. Some prisoners are promoted. They are given marginal autonomy, permitted to oversee others, to relay instructions, to report inefficiencies. The illusion of elevation is powerful. These prisoners begin to self-police, enforcing rules more harshly than the overseers ever did. The prison monitors this behavior with interest. Authority delegated downward reduces expenditure. Resentment blooms quietly. Not toward the prison, it is too vast, too abstract, but toward other prisoners, those who collapse, those who slow the line, those who draw attention. Division stabilizes the population more effectively than force. Interrogation no longer feels urgent. Most answers have already been extracted, not through questioning, but through behavior. Ideology reveals itself under stress. Loyalty fractures under repetition. Confession becomes redundant. The prison prefers observation to dialogue. Mid-cycle adjustments ripple through the complex. Air grows drier. Lighting sharpens. Auditory dampening relaxes slightly, allowing machinery noise to intrude more aggressively. The effect is subtle but cumulative. Concentration falters. Error rates rise just enough to justify increased correction. No one complains. Complaints require energy. Energy is rationed instinctively now. Prisoners conserve breath, movement, thought. Survival has narrowed to the space directly in front of the body. Anything beyond that feels irrelevant, unreachable. By the time the artificial day approaches its end, the prison has already learned what it needed. Which bodies are nearing failure, which minds are pliable, which individuals can be repurposed. Night will refine these conclusions, and the prisoners, whether they understand it or not, move toward their cells with the quiet knowledge that the prison is no longer testing them. It is finalizing their roles.
Prisoners no longer think of themselves as individuals. Names have lost meaning. Faces have blurred. Memory has collapsed into patterns of movement, breath, and reaction. The prison does not need to speak to them. It communicates through environment, through vibration, through temperature, through the smallest possible distortions in light and air. Compliance has become instinct. Chains descend automatically. Wrists and ankles lock in precise alignment. Any deviation from posture triggers micro-corrections. Pressure plates adjust. Restraint fields tighten. Subtle shifts in gravity redistribute weight. The body obeys before the mind registers intent. The prison does not punish, it molds. Labor flows begin again. Prisoners move through the corridors with mechanical efficiency. Conveyor lines, processing machines, and energy conduits stretch into the distance, dwarfing human scale. Each movement is tracked, logged, and analyzed. A single misstep ripples across the system, but corrections are seamless, invisible, and immediate. Observation is total. Every neural impulse, every heartbeat, every minor tremor is recorded. The prison does not rely on fear anymore. Fear is unnecessary. It has been internalized. Resistance is not eliminated through force. It has been replaced by anticipation, by instinctive submission.
In the isolation tiers, the most resilient prisoners are broken differently, not through pain, but through attention. Lumen strips fluctuate, air currents move unpredictably, sounds arrive from impossible angles, and shadows bend independently of light sources. The mind reaches for pattern, fails, and fragments further. Identity is stripped, leaving only function. Interrogation systems are quiet but pervasive. Questions are anticipated, answers predicted, neural responses cataloged. No force is required. The prison already knows what will occur. The human element has become another variable within a machine of infinite patience. The anomaly persists. A subtle presence threads through the prison like a current too fine to detect directly. It influences micro-behaviors, enhances the effectiveness of stimuli, and ensures that even those who might adapt fully cannot do so without consequence. The prison and the anomaly operate together, one structure, one rhythm, one inescapable process. By mid-cycle, the prisoners exist only as components. Hands turn valves, lift loads, push levers, and adjust machinery. Heads nod slightly, eyes follow prescribed paths. Lungs inhale and exhale at regulated intervals. Thought has become a liability. Movement without thought is efficiency. Survival without awareness is perfection. And through it all, the prison watches, not with emotion, not with judgment. It observes with infinite patience, refining, correcting, iterating. It does not stop. It will not stop. The night will arrive again, and the cycle will continue, endless, absolute, inevitable. The prisoners, too exhausted to resist, are already preparing, unwittingly, for what comes next.
It does not descend, it manifests. Lumen strips shift frequencies imperceptibly, bathing the corridors in a sickly, cold clarity. The prison breathes through its systems, pulsing, alive in a way that defies comprehension. Prisoners feel it immediately, not as threat, but as the inexorable alignment of their bodies with the vessel of control. Chains engage without sound. Wrists, ankles, torsos, all are locked in positions calculated to maximize compliance. Micro-adjustments continue throughout the night. Muscles tighten and relax in rhythms they cannot anticipate. Pain is unnecessary, anticipation suffices. The prison knows instinct before thought, reaction before intent. The anomaly weaves through the complex. Not visible, not tangible, but undeniable. It threads through air ducts, ventilation shafts, and power conduits, altering subtle currents of energy, shifting perception, bending reflex. Prisoners experience its influence as disorientation, as unease, as the creeping certainty that something watches not only their bodies, but their intentions. Labor ceases, but movement continues. Prisoners in isolation tiers are guided into sensory chambers designed for maximum perceptual distortion. Walls shift imperceptibly. Floors incline in subtle angles. Light pulses in frequencies too brief to register consciously. Every sense is stretched, bent, or denied, and the mind strains to impose pattern where none exists. Observation reaches its apex. Neural implants, servitors' sensors, and environmental monitoring converge into a single, unblinking data stream. Every blink, every heartbeat, every inhale is measured, compared against predicted models, and logged. Those who deviate are not punished, they are corrected silently through the environment itself. Some prisoners attempt thought.
They try to reason, to strategize, to resist internally. Their efforts are noted. Predictive algorithms anticipate the outcome before action occurs. Thought becomes another variable in the prison's calculations. By the time a prisoner believes they have devised a plan, it has already been neutralized by subtle environmental nudges. A flicker of light, a vibration in the floor, a pulse in the air. Sleep is impossible. Bodies that collapse are repositioned automatically. Limbs lock in restorative angles that prevent unconsciousness. Even dreaming is controlled. Neural pathways are stimulated to suppress memory consolidation. The prison does not allow dreams that might inspire hope. The mind must remain functional but malleable. Hallucinations emerge. Shadows bend in impossible ways. Machinery repeats sounds with slight, disorienting variation. Faces appear and vanish at the periphery of vision. Patterns form and dissolve before the mind can grasp them. The anomaly ensures that perception remains fragmented, identity frays further. By the final hours, resistance has all but vanished. Some prisoners are aware that they are no longer fully themselves. Others sense only a mechanical version of their own bodies moving automatically. Either way, the night achieves its purpose. Compliance has become instinct, obedience a product of survival, and individuality a fading echo. The prison is satisfied. It waits, patient and eternal, for the artificial day to return, knowing that when it does, the cycle will continue, and the prisoners will move again as components in a system far larger and far older than themselves. And they will obey, because they have no choice, and because the prison has taught them that instinct is survival. Lumen strips flare with brutal clarity, exposing every surface, every body, every flaw. Chains descend with the precision of inevitability. Prisoners stir not from desire, but because their bodies know the rhythm. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat has been anticipated. Compliance is no longer forced, it is instinct. The prison has completed its work. After endless cycles, after nights that fractured thought and days that demanded perfection, the prisoners are no longer human in any meaningful sense. They are extensions of the structure, components in the great machine that has measured, cataloged, and optimized them. Resistance is a memory. Identity is a placeholder. Survival is reduced to action. Labor flows begin seamlessly. Conveyor lines stretch into caverns of machinery, spanning miles of steel and conduit. Hands work with mechanical precision. Eyes follow calculated paths. Thought is deferred to instinct. Mistakes are anomalies, immediately corrected by subtle adjustments in restraint fields, floor gradients, or environmental pulses. The prison watches, waits, and iterates. Isolation tiers remain active. Those few who retained fragments of self-awareness are guided into chambers that blur perception further. Light pulses, vibrations shift, air currents fluctuate. Hallucinations, disorientation, and exhaustion converge into perfect compliance. Even the anomaly, unseen, intangible, pervasive, ensures that minds do not reconstruct, do not resist. Observation is total. Neural implants, servitors, and environmental sensors form a single network, recording, analyzing, predicting. Each micro-tremor, each shallow breath, each shift of attention feeds into an algorithm that has become more precise with every cycle. The prison knows the prisoners better than they know themselves. The anomaly pulses subtly. It threads through conduits, walls, and corridors, influencing perception, guiding behavior, and ensuring that no thought escapes the prison's grasp. It is not malicious, not in a conventional sense. It simply exists as part of the mechanism, another layer of inevitability. By mid-cycle, some prisoners pause briefly, not in defiance, but in calculation. Their bodies respond before their minds. Every hesitation has been accounted for, and the environment nudges them forward, returning them to function. Resistance has been internalized, neutralized, converted into compliance without overt force. The prison hums. Its systems, ancient and infinite, maintain themselves, monitor themselves, and observe everything contained within. It is patient, eternal, absolute. The anomaly, the machinery, the cycles, they are all one. When the next night arrives, it will not need to break them further, because the prisoners, stripped of identity, fractured in mind, and hollowed in will already obey. And the prison, vast and immutable, will continue its cycles, always precise, always patient, always inevitable. There is no hope, there is no mercy, there is only function. And function in the Imperial prison is eternal.